The sun was falling low behind the rocky hills, painting the wide desert in colors of red and gold. The poor cowboy named Luke rode slowly on his tired horse, his hat low over his eyes. Dust rose from each step of his boots as he led the horse down to the small creek that still had a little water left from spring rain. Life on the edge of the desert was hard, but he had learned to live with silence. Every sound was a friend to him. The wind, the cry of a hawk, the creak of old leather. As he reached the creek, he saw something strange by the waterline. At first he thought it was a broken log or maybe a bundle of clothes washed down from the hills. But when he got closer, his horse stopped and snorted. Luke squinted and saw it was a person. A woman lying still on the sand, her dark hair spread around her like spilled ink. He jumped off the horse and ran forward. The woman's skin was tanned deep by the sun, her face covered in dust and sweat. She was taller than most women, her shoulders broad, her arms strong. She wore torn Apache clothing, and blood had dried along a cut on her arm. She looked half dead, breathing so faintly he could barely see her chest move. Luke hesitated. The old fear of border tales came to his mind. Stories of raids, revenge, and ambushes. But she didn't look like danger. She looked lost. He knelt beside her and touched her wrist. A weak pulse beat beneath his fingers. "You're alive," he whispered. She didn't respond. Her lips were cracked, her face pale beneath the dirt. He looked around, no tracks except hers. Whoever she'd been running from was long gone. "All right, girl," he said softly. "Let's get you out of this sun." He lifted her carefully, surprised by her weight and height. Her body was warm and strong, yet she felt fragile in his arms. He placed her across the horse's back and led the animal slowly toward his cabin, a mile away through dry brush and silent land. The journey took long, and by the time he reached his wooden house, the stars had begun to shine. Inside the small cabin, he laid her on his bed. The room smelled of dust, horses, and smoke from last night's fire. He poured a little whiskey over her wound, and she stirred, flinching. "Easy now," he said. "It's all right." He tore a strip from an old shirt and wrapped her arm tightly. Then he filled a tin cup with water and held it to her lips. She drank weakly, spilling half of it down her chin. Her eyes opened for a second, dark eyes that looked both fierce and frightened. She stared at him, unsure if he was friend or foe. "You're safe," Luke said quietly. "Just rest." For a while, the only sound in the cabin was the crackle of fire. He cooked beans and a bit of dried meat in a small pan. When he offered her some, she looked uncertain but accepted. She ate slowly, her hands shaking. After a long silence, she spoke one word in broken English. "Talako, Tala," he repeated. "That your name?" She nodded. Her voice was low but steady. "Yes, Tala." Luke smiled faintly. "Name's Luke. You're lucky I came by that creek. What happened to you?" Tala looked at the floor. She spoke a few more words, halting and unsure, trying to make him understand. She said her people were attacked. Not by soldiers, but by another tribe. Many were killed. She ran for days, hiding in canyons until her legs gave up. Luke listened in silence. He didn't know what to say. She looked so strong, yet so lost. He saw the pain in her eyes, not just from the wound, but from everything she had lost. "You can rest here," he said at last. "Nobody'll bother you." She looked at him long and hard, trying to see if she could trust him. At last, she nodded slowly. That night, she sat near the fire, wrapped in a blanket. The flames lit her face, showing deep lines of exhaustion and quiet strength. Luke mended a broken bridle at the table, glancing at her now and then. She was not like any woman he had seen before. Taller than him, her face proud even in weakness. Yet there was something gentle about the way she held the cup of water, or the way her eyes followed the sparks rising in the air. The wind outside whistled through cracks in the walls. Luke threw another log into the fire. "You can take the bed," he said finally. "I'll sleep by the door." Tala looked at him with confusion. "Why, just manners," he said simply. "My mama raised me right." She hesitated, then nodded. "You good man," she said softly. He gave a small smile and turned away, stretching out on the floor with his blanket. In the middle of the night, the storm came. Lightning flashed beyond the window, thunder rolling across the open land. Luke woke to hear Tala crying quietly. She was sitting up, clutching her blanket, whispering in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but could feel the grief in them. He stayed quiet, letting her cry. Sometimes silence was the only comfort a man could offer. By dawn, the storm had passed. Sunlight filled the small cabin again. Luke made coffee and warmed some bread. Tala's wound looked better. She tried to stand, but swayed. He caught her gently by the arm. "Easy," he said. "You need more rest." She shook her head. "No rest, must go." Go where? He asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the horizon through the window. He sighed. You ain't ready to walk out there yet. You'll drop in an hour. She frowned, frustrated but silent. He handed her more food. Eat first, he said. For the first time she smiled. Just a small, shy smile that made her look young and alive again. She took the food and nodded. After breakfast, she stepped outside to breathe the morning air. The land stretched endless and quiet, just wind, sand, and distant hills. She looked small and strong standing there, her long hair moving in the breeze. Luke watched from the doorway, wondering where she came from, who she had been before the desert took her strength away. Suddenly, her body tensed. She turned sharply toward the horizon. Luke followed her gaze and froze. Far away, the morning light shimmered off something moving. Small dark dots at first, then larger shapes. Horses. Many of them. Tala's breath caught. She whispered something he didn't catch. What is it? He asked. She looked at him with wide eyes. They come, she said. My people. He stepped out onto the porch, shading his eyes. The ground seemed to tremble with the rhythm of hooves. A line of riders stretched across the valley. Moving fast, warriors painted in red and black, carrying spears and rifles, their hair flying like dark flames in the wind. 100 men, Tala said softly, her voice shaking. Luke's hand went to the rifle hanging by the door. 100? He muttered. She nodded. They think you take me. They think you hurt me. His heart pounded. I didn't hurt you. I know, she said, eyes pleading. But they don't. He looked at her, the tall girl he had saved from dying, and then at the oncoming riders, the dust rising behind them like a storm. He could hear the shouts now, the calls of the tribe echoing through the valley. Luke took a deep breath. Guess this day just got interesting. Tala grabbed his arm. Please, no fight. I talk. The ground shook harder. The riders were almost there. Luke could see the faces now. Fierce, painted, filled with anger and fear for the one they thought lost. He lifted his rifle but didn't aim. All right, he said calmly. You talk. The horsemen began to surround the cabin. Tala stood tall beside him, wind whipping her hair. Her wound still bled faintly through the bandage, but her voice when she shouted in her language was strong and clear. The warriors stopped, their leader raising a hand. The poor cowboy had helped her without thinking, but now his small act of kindness had brought a storm to his door, and as the circle of riders tightened around them, he stood still beside her, ready to face whatever came next. The ground shook as the riders came closer, their horses thundering like a storm breaking across the land. Dust rose into the air, covering the sunlight. Luke stood quietly on his porch, the rifle still hanging loose in his hand. Beside him, Tala stood tall, her face pale but her eyes full of fire. The circle of Apache riders closed around the cabin, 100 men, all armed, their painted faces fierce under the morning sun. One of them, taller and older, rode ahead. He wore a necklace made of eagle feathers and his horse was black as night. He stopped only a few steps away from Luke and looked down at him. His eyes were sharp and cold. Tala stepped forward quickly. She spoke in her language, her words fast and full of feeling. Luke could not understand, but he saw her pointing at him, then at her bandaged arm. The warriors murmured among themselves, but they didn't lower their weapons. The leader dismounted and walked toward the cabin. Luke felt his chest tighten. The man's shadow fell across the porch. You, the leader said in broken English. You take my daughter? Luke blinked in surprise. Your daughter? He said. She's your... Tala turned and nodded. Yes, she whispered. My father. The chief's face was hard as stone. She gone for days, he said slowly. We find her clothes, blood, no trail. We think white man take her. Luke's voice stayed calm, though his hands were shaking slightly. Found her by the creek, half dead. Patched her up, gave her food. That's all I'd done. The chief's eyes narrowed. Why? Luke shrugged a little. Because it was right. I don't leave folk to die in the dirt. There was silence. Wind brushed through the tall grass. Tala looked between them, then spoke again in Apache, her voice rising. The warriors murmured, watching her closely. She pointed to the wound on her arm, to the small bed inside the cabin, and to the untouched food on the table. She kept saying one word again and again. Luke didn't know what it meant, but the way she said it was full of respect. The chief looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he stepped closer to Luke. They stood face to face, two men from worlds apart. One poor cowboy with a torn shirt and tired eyes, and one proud Apache leader wearing the marks of his people. You no touch her? The chief asked. Luke shook his head. No, sir, never. The chief's jaw tightened, then slowly he nodded. She lived because you help. That is good. He turned to his men and shouted something in Apache. At once, the warriors lowered their weapons. The sound of their horses snorting filled the silence. Tala's shoulders dropped with relief. She took a deep breath, then looked at Luke and smiled faintly. The chief turned back. You brave man, he said. Many fear us. You not fear. Fear don't matter much when someone's dying, Luke said simply. The old man studied him, then gave a small smile. You speak like man who lost much. Luke didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the horizon. He didn't talk about the family he once had. A wife buried years ago. A small grave behind the cabin marked only by a wooden cross. The land had taken everything from him, but it had taught him kindness too. Tala walked to her father and touched his arm. He saved me, she said softly. He good, the chief nodded and looked at Luke again. You helped my blood. My people remember. He took a leather cord from around his neck and handed it to Tala. She hesitated, then turned and gave it to Luke. It was a simple bracelet of beads and eagle bone. Gift, she said in her quiet English. For remember, Luke stared at it. I can't take this, he said. It looks important. Tala shook her head. It mean thank you. He accepted it slowly, feeling the smooth beads against his rough fingers. Then I'll keep it, he said softly. The chief raised his hand. At once his men began to turn their horses. The sound of leather and hoofbeats filled the air again. Before he climbed back into his saddle, the chief looked at Luke one last time. You good man, he said. If ever danger comes, send word. My people come, Luke nodded. I'll remember that. The old warrior smiled faintly. You help one of us, you help all. Then he turned and rode off. Tala climbed onto a brown horse beside him. Before leaving, she looked back at Luke. The morning light caught her face and her eyes shone. You safe now? She said softly. No fear. Same to you, Luke replied. Their eyes met for a moment longer. Then she rode away, disappearing with her people into the wide golden land. Dust hung in the air long after they were gone. The cowboy stood on his porch for a long time, the bracelet still in his hand. He felt strange, empty and full at the same time. He had helped her out of simple kindness, but what had come of it felt bigger than anything he had ever known. He went back inside and sat by the fire. The cabin was quiet again, only the faint smell of smoke and desert wind. He looked at the bed where she had slept. The blanket folded neatly, the cup still on the table. Guess you were right, girl, he murmured to himself. No fear, days passed. The ranch went back to its quiet rhythm. He mended fences, rode into town once for supplies, nodded to the folks who barely noticed him. But some nights, when the wind carried sounds from the hills, he could almost hear the distant beat of drums, deep, steady, like a heart remembering. One evening, a trader from the south stopped by his cabin. The man had seen the Apache tribe passing through the canyons. He told Luke that their chief had spoken of a white man with the heart of fire who had saved his daughter's life. Luke only smiled. They sure do talk nice, he said quietly. After the trader left, he sat on the porch again, turning the bracelet in his hand. The beads glowed faintly in the sunset. It reminded him that kindness could reach across any line drawn by men, race, land, fear, or pride. The sky grew dark, and stars filled it like tiny fires. His horse moved softly in the corral, the wind whispering through the sage. He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky. Sometimes he thought he saw shapes in the distance, riders moving along the ridge, their silhouettes fading into moonlight. Maybe it was just his imagination, or maybe they really watched him from afar, keeping the promise their chief had made. He didn't mind either way. He had peace now, a quiet kind, the kind that doesn't make noise but stays deep inside. He stood and walked back into the cabin, setting the bracelet beside his wife's old photo on the table. Guess we still doing all right, he whispered. Outside, the desert stretched endless and calm. The firelight flickered through the small window, and the cowboy's shadow moved gently across the wall. The poor cowboy who once lived alone in silence had found something he didn't expect. Not love, not wealth, but the simple truth that helping another soul could change everything. And somewhere, under the same stars, an Apache girl named Tala looked at the sky too, remembering the man who had given her life back when she thought it was lost. Neither of them spoke the other's language well, but both had understood the same thing. That kindness needed no words.